About racism and discrimination that Latino children have experienced in the schools. And we are going to be discussing then also what kinds of, which of these, if any, problems or other problems do you think your Latino students are facing in your own schools. And then in the second half, I'll say a little bit about the Latino commitment to education, how eager parents and children often were in the past, and talk about whether that continues now, and give you some quantitative material that you may want to use in your testing again, which provides demonstrable evidence of how sure people, Latino families, were that their children should be in school. So, starting out now, these are some of the problems that turn up in interviews as challenges that Latino students faced as they were going to school in Boulder County. Some of them were practical. So for farm children, for instance, if you lived in an isolated place, it might be a very long walk to get to your school. Some children do talk. Walking several miles was common. In a couple of cases, they were walking 4 miles each way. So it was a long day for kids, and it might well have been a reason for not going to school. It was just so hard to get there. Naming. I was thinking about this yesterday when Jason was talking about group labels, group designations. Latino children here and all over the Southwest commonly had their names changed when they registered for school. The authorities at the school, maybe from perfectly well-intentioned meanings, they may have thought that the kids would settle in better in school if they had names that sounded like the other Anglo children's names. But it was very common that names would be changed. And there's a great clip on the primary sources under education. There's a lovely clip of a woman this was filmed in the 70s. She's making tortillas as she talks, but she describes her experiences as a child going to school because she had been named Jesus, and which could apply to either boys or girls. And so she arrived at school, and the teacher said, "What? Your name is Jesus? This is not going to happen." And they renamed her Jenny. So a number of adults, when they were here, felt very bitter that they had lost their names in school. And some of them, in fact, didn't even realize that they had been baptized with a different name until much later, because the school called them by a more common Anglo name, and their parents wanted to reinforce what was happening at school and help them settle in, and so they used that name too. So this was a very important aspect of losing culture, was your own name.
Did you have a specific name of someone who might be on your website or who might have given that account in your
Yes. If you go onto the table, the listing of primary sources under education,
yeah.
Her name is Jessie Velas Lehman. She married an Anglo.
Okay, thank you.
It's on this wonderful film that was made in 1978 called Los Inmigrantes.
Okay.
It's a great film.
It's part of that. Sorry.
It's a great film.
Yeah. Have you looked at it?
Yeah, I used because that's where that clip comes from that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I made that primary source set, so
yeah. Kat is the key authority on that. Another problem is that the schools almost invariably and up until very recently insisted that the children speak Spanish at school. Sorry, never speak Spanish at school, even on the playgrounds. And the standard remedy was that they would be slapped or hit with a ruler, or every time they spoke a Spanish word, there would be some kind of physical punishment for them. And again, we have some powerful interview material about this, of kids who were brought up to the front of the room and shamed first verbally and then physically spanked for having spoken Spanish at school. And one of the slightly alarming things we heard last summer is that one of the teachers who was engaged with the project then said that she had been at a school in which the principal had decided that the children should not be allowed to speak Spanish in the hallways inside the building. When they were on the playground, if they wanted to, it was okay, but whenever they were inside the building, it was English.
today?
Last year, yes. So,
and that was going on at what time period?
Recently. So those pressures still continue because some educators feel that still continue to feel, against all the evidence, that it is better to do 100% total immersion of foreign language speaking children. So that was another big problem for them. And again, many of the adults who were being interviewed any time from the 70s on up to the present time feel bitter that that too contributed to their own loss of pride in their heritage, to knowing who they are.
And language, I think.
And to language.
Because my father's generation, he and all of his brothers, he has like 8, none of them taught their kids English because they had been punished for speaking.
They didn't teach them Spanish?
Or Spanish,
Yeah.
that's right. They didn't teach us because they didn't want us to struggle like they did.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see why. I mean, you know, if the parents were trying to do the best thing for their children, and they thought, well, the children will get ahead better in this new society if they speak only that language. But in terms of cultural identity, in terms of pride in your heritage, from the time you start school, you're told that you will be physically punished whenever you speak Spanish words. I mean, this is really pretty startling to me, and the fact it's continued so long. There's also the problem that because children didn't speak English comfortably when they came into school, or if they didn't speak English, that was seen as a lack of intelligence. And then there's another very nice piece of little, from an interview, a discussion of a woman who describes coming home from school, being walked home from school after she had been to a number of different schools because her parents were farm workers in Boulder County. And she had learned how to read. And finally, one of her teachers decided that because she could do math, it must be that she was not, in fact, retarded, which is what everybody had been saying. If she could do math, she probably ought to be able to learn how to read too, and then sat down with this child and found that, in fact, she didn't speak English, and all of the reading instructions had been only in English. And so the teacher then walked home 2 miles to the little house where they were living on the edge of a farm, and said to her mother, with this girl and her younger brother, actually, your children are not retarded, and we're now going to work with them to help them learn enough English that they can learn how to read. So these are really very powerful experiences for children, and you just wonder why anybody stayed in school when they were confronting these kinds of challenges. We learned from interviews also that a number of these problems continued right through the century, the 20th century, and our discussion will be on whether they continue now, or are there other kinds of issues. So, for instance, children who were not native English speakers were often assumed to have severe other kinds of challenges in school, and therefore they were put into special classrooms. And this was aided by the fact that there was often more money for special ed. So the school districts had some incentive financially to put anybody they could into special ed classrooms. So this was going on right through. We have a number of examples of this. Dirty and head lice. Honestly, the number of times that head lice turn up in our interviews is really quite startling. We have several of those also in the samples. That if there is any problem with head lice at school, it is assumed that it has been introduced by the Latino children and that they must be quarantined or sent to the doctor or have treatment that's different from that of the Anglo children. And then there's the business about the inherent sort of laziness, lack of interest, lack of talent of Latino children, and so that even if they have some things going for them, they're not likely to succeed, and therefore it's not worth the investment of the teacher's time in these kids because they're not going to finish high school even anyway. So why should we do any more? An interesting feature of this is that there were Catholic schools in both Boulder and Longmont, and there too there is very clear evidence of racism in those schools. The Catholic churches were not any more accepting of Latino children than the public schools. We have heard from several very powerful women involved in the project that their mothers not only wanted them to stay in school, but went into school and fought on their behalf. So one of them, I just put 2 up here. Are you keeping track of my time?
I am, thank you. You are on 10 minutes right now.
Oh, hey. Well, the first one involves Emma Gomez Martinez, whom we keep hearing about, after whom the park was named. So she she was in school in Erie, and there was this head license in which the Latino children, she and her sister, were sent home. And so look at what she wrote. I didn't want to take the time to play the clip from her interview with her.
Oh.
So that's one example of a powerful mom. I threw that one, okay. And then the next one is from Eleanor Montour, who is Alicia Sanchez's daughter. So we're hearing Alicia speaking to her daughter here. So, and isn't it interesting that both of those women, both of the daughters, ended up becoming these extremely effective, forceful, committed community leaders. They had good role models at home, even though their mothers, well, Alicia Sanchez was not educated. I mean, not formally educated, and neither was Emma Gomez's mother. So the women, the mothers, were not coming from positions of inherent strength, but they were unwilling to accept poor treatment of their daughters, but also unwilling to accept their daughters caving in under pressure. So the last point I want to make is simply this, that things got much worse in middle school and high school, junior high and senior high. And there the problem was not so much difficulty with teachers, but difficulty with the other kids. There were a lot of inter-ethnic conflicts, and also intra-ethnic ones, as children from families that had been there for multiple generations interacted with newly arrived immigrants. Those relationships were themselves not often calm. So now we have tact.
Part in a Socratic seminar after she gives us after Marjorie gives us the second part. So I want you to take, originally we were going to do 5 minutes, but I think since we're short on time, let's just do about 3 minutes. I want you guys to write down at least 2 questions that you guys, or statements that you guys want to bring to this Socratic seminar. So,
Dealing with education.
Dealing with the information that you have received from Marjorie so far with discrimination and racism in the school system. And what she talked about being how things haven't really changed that much in some ways.
Or have they?
Or have they?
Maybe you're going to say you don't think there are problems of these kinds in your school. And if that's the case, how come not? What's different?
And I'm going to try and figure out how to use this.
I'm going to move us along, and then we'll have time for discussion at the end. In light of the kinds of problems that we were just discussing, it seems to me surprising that so many Latino children and parents were willing to insist that education was important. Now, that was true primarily for first and second generation families. It is in some cases true now. I think statistically, first generation children are more likely to finish high school than third and fourth generation Latinos in the St. Payne School District, for instance. So over time, some of that commitment may have weakened. But after all, if you think that people were making an enormous sacrifice to leave their home countries, to leave behind what they knew in their families, and to make this jump into the unknown, we keep hearing this phrase, to have a better life for our children. Better life. More opportunities for our children. And that, in many cases, meant education. So parents were constantly saying to their children, we have sacrificed in order that you can get an education. And you need to take advantage of that. If we look at the numbers of school children in Longmont, starting in the 1910s, and I'll show you a table about that in a minute, you can also determine from the census records how many Latino surnamed families there were in Longmont in each decade across the period. And there is a remarkable correlation between the number of families with children in the Longmont schools and the number of Latino families in the town. Now that is less true for the migrant worker families, of course, the ones who were not living in the town itself. The kids who were on scattered farms, and especially in the earlier period, whose families were doing sugar beet work, they were less, I'm sure, we don't know this, but I assume they were less likely to be in school, in part because there was no school nearby, and in part because their labor was needed. But for anybody who had access to a school, it was taken advantage of. Not necessarily by all of the children in the family, but at least by some. There's a movement into the Goss Grove, the Goss Water Street neighborhood in Boulder beginning in the 30s. And when those families were interviewed in the 70s and asked why did they decide to come into Boulder, partly it's because they thought there would be more employment opportunities for the fathers. There was more at-home work for mothers, like ironing things, like doing laundry for the university, whatever. But always mentioned was they wanted their kids to go to a better school, in particular to be able to go to high school. So Boulder had what was originally, and to some extent still, preparatory school for people who were going to go on to college. And so the draw of that good high school for Latino families was strong.
And was Boulder High School that high school?
Yeah. So by the 1930s, you start having young people graduating from high school, particularly in Boulder, but a few occasionally in Longmont, not so much, and in Lafayette also. And again, in Boulder, by the 50s and 60s, there's something like 4 to 8 kids, Latino kids graduating every year. And since there were only something like 10 families there, these numbers are quite strong. Those families were committed to education, and boy, did their kids never have to stay in school. The kids, as adults, talked about how much they resented at times their parents' determination that they would finish high school.
Do you have those numbers from Longmont?
No, I don't have them because the Longmont School Census records don't indicate how many of them graduate. So we know how many of them are still in senior high, but we don't know if they actually achieve the requirements of graduate. So and again, parents said, look, you're getting an education not for the life of the mind particularly, but you're going to have a better future. So there were also opportunities for adult education beginning in the later 60s and 70s. This is one of the dramatic changes of that whole Chicano era, which is that thanks to the Office of Economic Opportunity, which employed lots of women in programs like Community Action Program, Head Start. These women then were encouraged by the program to go ahead and get their GEDs and to go to college. So there were a lot of new opportunities for women. And then the GI Bill provided educational opportunities for men. So adult education then became much more accessible in the 60s and 70s in a way that it's gone back out again now. It was easier for adults to get an education then than it is now. So quantitatively, let me just give you a few bits of interesting information from these tables that we have about the school children. As I mentioned, they're great teaching tools. So and they're all up on the website. They're on the same. Eric is cheering. Eric!
You have to free it all up though, Marjorie. Sometimes you cannot get access to many of them. That is still true.
To the
they're
tables?
pretend on the website. They're not like all, so I can get like 1935, 1945, but I can't get another one. So they're not.
Let's talk
all-
afterwards. They're all on the
Yeah.
Boulder County Latino website.
Yeah.
So let's
We'll fix that up though. But
Check
yeah,
that, yeah.
they're really good. It's good stuff. It's really
yeah,
good stuff.
they're just samples on our Google Drive one, but all of them are up on the Boulder County Latino History Project website. So this is what the evidence looks like once it's been typed into our sheet. So we have these core volunteers who spent hundreds of hours going through all these records. And we also had to bring a Freedom of Information Act, Open Records Act to get the numbers, to get the records out of the Boulder Valley schools. They didn't think they had them, but it turns out they did. We're quite sure they have to say, but they went and found them. So this, you can't read the numbers here, but this tells you then the name of the kids, how old they were, what grade they were in, information about the parents, information about literacy of the parents, and so on. Yeah. Oh, what up?
I activate this. To the right of it? Right there. That one.
Thank you. Yeah, I see where I'm going.
There you go.
Thank
And then
you.
it's
I
bigger.
forgot to put it back to the display mode. Thank you. That helps a little. So these are the kinds of, that's the type of information you have then year by year by year. And if we analyze it, here's some things we learned from those tables. One is, what fraction of the kids in school were Latino, of all of the school-age children? And here there are great big differences between the towns. So if you look at Lafayette in the middle, by the 1940s, virtually a third of all the kids in school were Latino, which means then that they had a cohort. They had a group of other kids who were, in some respects, like them, who had similar experiences. It was relatively comfortable to be one of a third of the kids, even if there were still discriminatory factors. Yeah.
Do you have this data through the end of the century?
No, because the School Census book stopped in 1964, alas. So we have then this big fraction in Lafayette. In Longmont, it's up to about 10% by the 40s. But look at Boulder. Boulder never gets above 3%. And that means then that, I mean in some very simple sense, the fewer of you that you are, the less easy it is to develop a sense of an identity as being a group that is a full member of the community. So those Boulder kids hung together, but there sure were not very many of them. I can't remember what this one was. Oh yes, this is ages. And here, let me just pull you some information about that. We can follow then the ages of the kids over time, and we can follow the grade levels. So in terms of upper grades, it's just what you would expect from an immigrant population. It's what's been done in studies of every immigrant population all around the country for people coming from different areas. So at the beginning, they're in the lower grades, of course, because they're just starting. If you follow it then decade by decade, the numbers and percentages going on into the upper grades increases, and there's very nice progression right over time. You can just see that going through. One of the startling pieces of information for me from these tables is the fraction of children who stayed in school at age 16 or more. So there was no law of minimum school age until after World War II, and then you had to stay in school until you were 16. But we see then in these records a substantial number of people who stayed in school beyond 16, and indeed people in school into their early 20s. So some of those may have been young people who didn't have access to education when they were younger, at the normal ages, and just started late. We're now trying to catch up. Others may have been, their educations may have been interrupted for some reason or another. But by age 17, you were considered an adult in terms of jobs. You were capable of taking on any type of full-time employment. So if children or young people are staying in school in their late teens and 20s, they or their families are making a substantial decision to say, we will have less income in order to keep this child in school. 12 months. And then we can also look at for 2 years, 2 decades, the records tell you the marital status of the women, not of the men. But in those 2 years, somewhere between 10 and 20% of these older female students were already married. And again, here's another stereotype going out of the window. I mean that, Latinas, they were married, stayed home and cooked, and at the beginning of their large family of babies, these women are staying in school.
And what's this time period now?
Sorry?
This is still before the 60s?
Yeah, yeah. So it's we have information from the 30s and the 50s. Those are the 2 times they report marital status. Eric.
Yeah, so this is curious. So I don't know if we have the data tracked like this, but the fact that some of the students are older,
yeah,
would you want to believe that they're having mixed age group classrooms?
Well, that's interesting, isn't
right?
it?
Because it would be the case that they just have like 3 kids in their own classroom that are 20 years old. That would be a little.
They're all mixed age classrooms.
That's actually because we're really rigid now. Like we segregate by age in public schools, like steeply. Like it's a technical argument, like whether or not a kid should start school if they're 1 month older or 1 month younger.
Yeah.
And it may have been it's just curious that it may have been more relaxed, like more Montessori-esque, like in the public schools, where they allow a variety of different ages to be. Yeah. That's interesting. I think this is an educational structural fact.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but you're right. I mean, they certainly are in mixed age classrooms because some of these older ones, they're not all in 11th and 12th grade. Some of them are in 7th and 8th grades. I mean, they're mainly past elementary school, but they're what we would consider sort of middle or junior high age. So they must have been in, I mean, they obviously were in there with children who had started school younger and be at the more common age for that. So, and again, now we feel that it would be humiliating for an older student to be in with somebody who's 5 years younger.
Or inappropriate.
Or inappropriate, indeed. All kinds of risk factors, but that doesn't seem to have been an issue. Okay, so, Kat, 'tis yours.
So I'm going to just have us start out with your kind of what questions you have and phrases and such, and let you guys know how Socratic seminar goes, correct? I know Vista does. Yeah? Okay, so I'm just going to have you guys start out, and if we hit a lull, which I really don't think we will, I have some kind of backup questions here. If you want to read them and draw on any of them. How do you believe this info will be received by students and staff? How can we use this information in the classroom? What about at the administrative level? Because you might be hitting a lot of resistance. Some of these stats can help you, stereotype bust. And then do you believe teaching this information will allow students to be more aware of stereotypes, bullying, equity, etc.? So those are just kind of some overall arching questions. If you want to touch on them, feel free. But I also really want you guys to bring what you were thinking about into this Socratic seminar, because this is critical thinking. So, anybody want to start?
I'll start. One of the questions that I wrote down was, what does it take to create permanent change? So we've heard several examples of people working really hard to create better, more supportive, more inclusive educational environments. And many of us have made the comment that we feel that, since the last push in the 80s, that it feels it's been stagnant and not much has changed since then, and maybe even regressed in some situations. So as we look to our own classrooms and wanting them to be the most positive experience for every student involved, what can we do within those 4 walls to make permanent change, and hopefully take that permanent positive change and spread it further?
One thing.
Sorry.
I think one thing we can do is teach kids about different examples of civic action, because they are the ones who will, as especially middle school and high school level, can really kind of analyze what, if their needs are being met or not. And I think sometimes they just don't know what to do. And so part of social studies teaching is teaching them about civic action. And so using some of the examples from the Latino History Project so that they can see that at a local level things have been done before. I think that's really empowering, but I think kids need lots of examples. So that's one way I think our incorporating this information into our instruction can impact students and help them feel more empowered and let them know that they can do something.
Did you want to share? Because I was just going to piggyback on her.
Yeah, no,
go ahead.
I piggyback too.
Okay, go ahead.
I think she makes a really good point that to have like permanent change, we have to have ongoing change, and I think empowering our kids to like think about how can they do that even when they're outside our classroom to continue to have that positive impact. I think is key.
And bringing it back to the kid, this year for the first time I taught the Children's March, and just having that, I mean, yes, I think it's so important to focus on the local, but then also focus on like, what have kids done in the past? How do kids have a voice in the world? And the Children's March is a super powerful venue for teaching that.
Yeah, I have one of our students who just graduated is a Latino who's a teen mom. This really neat girl. I was talking with her at graduation about coming back next year and talking to the students, you know, as a role model. I think you're right about like permanent versus ongoing. I don't know if we can make permanent change a lot. I think it's you have to keep working every year. But I was thinking about that, taking advantage of students this year to help the students next year.
I kind of hesitated on writing the word permanent because I was thinking long term, impactful, meaningful.
Yeah.
And just like with what you said too, it doesn't have to be huge. You don't have to take it to Washington, D.C. It can just be local.
And her raising awareness can also be pretty powerful.
Every little thing that they learn, just being taught.
I do think about what Marjorie and I were talking about the other day, though, as far as, you know, how do you really make change at those higher levels? And, you know, maybe old tactics are not going to be as effective, but we're just seeing our resources, not resources in terms of materials, but resources in terms of support for our programs at the district level. We're seeing those programs just, or those positions dwindle. And so, and like she said, we have people in the system who are, they can give some voice, but what do you do when it's not enough voice? They're not listening to that voice. So I'm thinking it might be kind of cyclical.
It is. I
You know, that
same thing.
there's a point where, you know, students and parents and teachers need to take a stand, a pretty loud stand. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it is cyclical. Because I remember starting teaching in St. Raymond, and bilingual education really had a voice, and it was new to so many of us, and slowly it's just, okay, now we've done that, so, but the maybe we'll go around.
I worry about that a little bit. I think that parents and teachers' voices matter as well as the students' voices. But I think that we're in a time where teachers aren't valued and our voices and opinions aren't heard. And particularly, I have a sense in St. Vrain that that's a growing issue. And it's scary to speak out right now, it kind of feels like. And so how do we get parents? I think that the one group that they do really listen to are the parents. And unfortunately, a lot of the parents who speak out are the parents in, you know, the dominant culture. So how do we get the parents organized? And, you know, I don't know.
definitely possible but it is the role of the teachers to get parents organized. I've told the story again about how Columbine was reconstituted by the superintendent, and we had this meeting, a Super Tuesday meeting with the superintendent, and he is like, sure, I'll have the meeting, and did not realize how many people were going to be there. It was the gym, the cafeteria was overfilling with like people, and it was, what, Sharon, you were there, right? Like 8, were you there? Not yet? Okay, so like probably 80% of our team were down. I mean, it was just like, and he, I think, was just shocked that they rallied these people, and people were talking. We had our students talking in Spanish and English. I mean, it was just the power of the community, and we did it within a week. We got all these families and people, and like, I mean, it was just, and they tried to shut us down, and they didn't, and it was because of parents and teachers. And we had to do it or the anonymous people had to do it in a way that was kind of secretive because we were fearful of, but we had the protection because we were able to reach out to yeah. But it's possible, but we have to come together
and then to maintain that so it is sustainable or permanent and doesn't cycle out, right? Like, 'cause you have these moments of when you're rallied and people are in a supporting position, and then what? You know, 3 or 5 or 10 years later, how do you maintain that? Or how do you just shift it? Like, why should we even have to continue to fight? Like, we should make these gains and then keep them and not have to worry about losing them.
That's true. So I have a related question. I think it's related. I think Marjorie said first and second generation immigrants are much more likely to graduate than third or fourth
at the present time.
I'm wondering why that is and how do we work against that?
I wonder that.
I don't personally know because I haven't studied this stuff, but there's a reigning theory though of it goes like this, like first generation immigrants tend to be like highly motivated in school, and they come there because they're really attached to their parents, and their parents say like, you gotta go get it done, like let's be serious, like from the old country, our lives were way worse, like now you've got this opportunity, we're here to have you in this. So there's a lot, like really high level of like excitement and motivation and then progressively what happens is some of these students have this experience where like, I mean, some people say like structural racism in society, like something stops them from being able to like get to some level. So like graduating from high school, but you realize high school doesn't quite get you as far as you need to get in our society. It's like minimum level is like undergraduate degree now. So there's like all these problems with poverty and being in debt as a student, school gets more expensive. All this stuff happens so that what happens is the dream that they were invested with early on suddenly becomes like much harder to get. And after like a generation or two, they're just like, done, you know, like we're just not gonna like, that's just something that we don't get done. Like we've tried for a couple generations, we just don't get master's degrees and PhDs and stuff like that. And it takes like, so what happens is like the will to fight was like stronger earlier in the generations. And then later it becomes kind of beaten out of them in a sense because they see their friends and everybody around them kind of stuck at the same socioeconomic gap, not moving out of the neighborhoods. So the belief in social mobility is weakened over time in this country. That's one, like, I'm not trying to say that's my view, but that's one possible explanation. Intergenerational poverty, right? So they see themselves just like their parents. They see their friends kind of like that.
Also, if you don't have papers, I mean, it's like, what? I can't go to college, or, you know, they can't go to college and get a good paying job.
Yeah, so that's a whole other issue, right? I was just assuming the casino that like some percentage of the kids had documents or whatever were born here and their parents can't. But yeah, if you get this thing involved in it. But those kids, again, the documents are also extremely motivated to work. You'll find that as well. But then it's like to push through, it's just tough, you know, it's not easy, you know? It's really not easy. People protect their spot in society in one way, shape, or form.
It's interesting you use the word fight. They have to fight for it.
Yeah. What was interesting? Sorry.
You were talking about fighting for their education.
Later generations aren't willing to fight.
Yeah.
It's just observation.
Yeah. I mean, it's a theory of problem maybe that would explain.
So you know those statistics we share, like, look, if you graduate from high school, you're likely to earn this much annually over your lifetime.
Yeah.
Graduate with an associate's degree. Do you think I mean, is that accurate stuff? Is that worth sharing? Is that true for people across the board, regardless of?
These are aggregate statistics.
Race?
Those are aggregate statistics. If you disaggregate stats, then you'll find different groups have different experiences with their education group. But on average, like if you were to pluck, what they do is they sample from like different strata. Like PhD people more likely to be employed, less unemployment, higher wages, on average. It doesn't say like for black PhD people like what their unemployment rate is. That's where it gets different.
But do you think it's relevant? I mean, do you think it's? So could we say to our students, hey, look, this really is worth pursuing that higher degree? I mean, is it still relevant to do that, or am I taking statistics that mostly apply, to white people?
I think it's very relevant. I think, yes, it can be disaggregated further, and we would have more insight, but bottom line is, whatever ethnicity you are, the further your education is, the better off you will be.
And we tell everybody that. We tell all of our students that.
Yeah, I think the statistics would still show general trends that would hopefully show students that they can navigate that glass ceiling, and kind of that social positioning that if, hey, if you do stick with this, even though you seem to have this willingness to give up, like look, maybe it doesn't trend as well as Anglo statistics, but it's still a trend, and kind of, I would imagine, they're not working on ability.
Yeah, having this girl come back from Front Range and talk about she's a teen mom, but she made it in college.
And I mean, that could be. There's a lot of statistics now about women still making 77 cents to the man's dollar. So you can break that down in a woman without a high school diploma. Her dollar is still only worth 77 cents, and PhD dollar is still 77 cents. So if you broke it down by ethnicity, it's still the same.
No, there's like for every white woman who makes 70 cents for every man's dollar, for African Americans it's actually lower, for Latinos.
But what I'm saying is like the education level is still more, so unfortunately the dollar is not equal, but at whatever level it is, it's that 50 cents or that 77 cents is going to be more of the more of the 77 cents. That's yes, no, I know that.
I have a question, kind of to change topics from all the numbers. What experiences do you guys have in your own schools and other schools you taught at, maybe where Marjorie talked at the beginning about teachers and admin saying you can't speak Spanish in the hallways or on the playground, and I think that I've heard it a little bit from certain corners of the building from teachers now in the last few years, and I'm just wondering what you guys have heard or maybe not heard.
When we got our new principal at Meade Elementary, they have this little pocket of Latino families, and they're the Villanuevas who have been there forever. And I think Juan is in high school. And they're so cute. It's that family. Okay. So that would be their Then there are his cousins too. Yeah. So and we've known those families for years. So when we got our new principal, of course the teachers embrace these families, whatever family it is. And she was there greeting all of these families, and this particular family came up, and I spoke to Maria the little bit I knew, and we were just chatting and had all of her kids, and the principal just walked away right there. So, and then I made it a point to tell the principal that this is a very, this is a well-known family. All of their kids have gone here. And that's probably why I'm not at Meade Elementary anymore. But yeah, she definitely was not, it was all about looks for her. It still is about looks, how the school looked. So, but at Meade Middle, I don't see it at all. I think it's great.
Yeah. I've written down something similar to kind of your question, and I think oftentimes, I hope I articulate this correctly, educators, you know, will say English only under like the disguise of pedagogy, like it's good for the student, but I think there's actually a fear of what's being said that they don't understand, and like what are they talking, you know, like, and I think that's not only for educators, I think it's for other non-Spanish, insecurity about non-Spanish speaking students who are like, you know, we don't know what that is, so we need to be back in our comfort level.
That makes me so mad. I just feel like you set up a classroom that's safe for everyone, and you trust that they're having academic conversations or just normal kid conversations, not bad-mouthing you or your classroom or something. Like, that's it's frustrating that there are teachers who, A, can't set up a classroom, you know, well enough, and B, have that fear. I don't know what it is, or insecurity.
I agree completely with that fear. I moved to a new school 2 years ago, and I don't really know what other teachers do within their classrooms, but students were coming in and saying that the parapro at recess was forbidding them from using Spanish on the playground, and so I had a conversation with her, and, well, the other kids think they're talking about them, and there's just this whole fear around it, and I did tell her, no, it's really okay, and they need to be able to use Spanish with one another. So
I'm going
the
to play
kids didn't
devil's
complain.
advocate for you. So I do speak Spanish, and I learned through immersion. So naturally for me, or not naturally, but first words I learned were a lot of bad words in Spanish. And I have worked with a lot of students in after-school programs who will use their Spanish to talk about the white kids or the
non-Spanish speakers.
Stupid white teachers, quote. And so I'm wondering how you guys would navigate that. I come in, I don't work in these programs, I just come into them, and so it's interesting to watch that dynamic of there's like, I had a group where it was like white against Latino. Like, it was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever been in. And it actually was at Angevine. So, which was really weird because I've actually worked at Angevine, but this was a very interesting cliquey group where I actually stepped in and had to say using Spanish is fine with me, but using Spanish in a way to talk about other people. Like, I went to my administration, I said, I have these students who it's okay to use Spanish to me for. I'm like, I'm all for using Spanish. I slip into Spanish sometimes, and my friends are like, what are you saying? But these students have only used Spanish. I haven't been able to catch them using Spanish in just a normal kind of like, just conversational. It's been only when they want to say something mean about someone where they won't know. So I'm wondering how you guys would navigate that.
Well, I think you kept that bar high. You would do the same thing with white kids or English speakers. You would do the same thing if they were saying something bad about teachers or
and they are. White kids are saying just really
right.
bad things about teachers and each other.
Totally.
Right.
It doesn't matter the language.
And ultimately,
not you,
they're
though,
saying
Rachel.
something
They don't
about
think about
students.
you.
They're
They love
expressing
you.
their frustrations in the education system that they're experiencing. So I would argue it's cathartic, you know, a good thing that they're expressing that negatively about, and then hopefully kind of
Find the root of the problem.
find the root of the problem and navigating how to make it better.
Okay.
So just like expletives don't really bother me, just other words, it's what's being said that we want to focus on.
There may be things to build community within the class. You know, the first couple weeks of school, getting to work with each other a lot, you know.
Yeah, I guess that I only come in for like a theater course, so, and it's for like 3 weeks, once a week. So, but it was a very interesting thing to see, and it was like the first time that I had ever felt the kind of like, moment. Because I'm only in my first year of being in the education program. So I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, so.
I have white kids who say that. Who say they think they're talking about us.
Yeah.
So that, I think if we start at the very beginning of the course with lots of mixing kids up, so they start working with everybody in the classroom, prevent that kind of division from happening at the beginning. It seems that's one approach.
whenever I have students come to me and say, I think they're talking about it, I say, well, why would you think that? What reason have you given them?
What'd you do? Wait, I want to hear from Travis, right? I haven't heard you say much.
Okay.
You see what you're about to say. So let's put you on the spot.
No, I agree with Mike. I think that's more like a symptom. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
So address the problem.
Address the problem.
Take care of it.
So talk to them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it brings it round to that in our schools, we need to have teachers who are representing our students and speaking the same language and culture. And I can give a couple examples in a summer program a few years ago. I was doing breakfast duty, and there's this huge line of kids, and we had kids from about 5 elementary schools in the summer program, and there's this little boy that just finished kindergarten. He's using this slew of bad language in Spanish, and I just walked up and said to him very sternly in Spanish, no bad words here. And he looked at me, and he was just shocked, but he came from a school that was a predominantly white school that I don't know if there were any teachers there that understood Spanish. And then on the other side, I've had new speakers. So for example, 2 Korean speakers in my class, one who'd been here a while and one who was new, and teaming them up that the one who'd been here a while could communicate with the student who's a brand new English speaker, and other teachers saying, well, how do you know that they're working on what they should be working on? And there's so much you can gain non-verbally. Just look.
So they're talking about across the room based on that body language. All right, so we are done for today for this support. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Don't be in the